Hi, welcome to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and this is my hot take on the new Tudor Black Bay Ceramic. As always with these hot takes, you need to be aware I have not held the watch, I have not worn the watch. This is entirely based on like videos and renders and photos I've seen on the net. So be aware that everything I say could change once I or you see this watch in the metal, which doesn't really make sense for this, but you know what I mean. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is whenever I deal with Rolex and Tudor products, I really struggle sometimes to get past the business aspects to look at the watch. I have tried really hard in this hot take to go past that. I couldn't completely. There's a little bit about the business aspects, the industry impacts of this watch at the very end, but I really did work hard to concentrate on the watch. Third point is that was actually remarkably easier for me than I expected. Those of you who have watched me before will know I'm not a big Tudor fan or not a big Rolex fan, but this watch, you might be surprised by my response. See you on the other side. Okay, so warnings and introductions out of the way. Now let's get into talking about the actual Tudor Black Bay Ceramic. How do I think about it? What do I think of it? At the risk of coming across kind of gushy, I think I love this watch, which catches me totally by surprise. Because you see, I don't like any other Tudor Black Bays. I find that in the vanilla versions, they are vanilla. They are pleasant watches, occasionally aspiring to be perhaps handsome, but they are, in the end, generic. They are easily mistaken for a lot of other watches that follow that same kind of neo-retro vibe. However, probably like vanilla ice cream, I'm finding that the Tudor Black Bay comes alive when it's given something extra. I had zero passion for the Black Bay 58 until I saw particularly the silver version, where suddenly it felt like there was an injection of art into what had previously been some sort of corporate focus group driven blah watch. Likewise with the Black Bay Core, I think I'll call it. I'd never really found anything to enjoy in the otherwise quite pleasant steel version, but I did always think there was an element again of art, of excitement in the bronze version. And that art, that excitement, that passion, that joy seems to really come through, for me at least, with this ceramic one. And I'm really, as I said, quite gushy about this. So what is it that takes this watch, which is just a Black Bay in ceramic, and sets it up so far apart from the steel versions that a watch I previously had no time for is suddenly making me all sort of woozy? I think it's, when I look at this watch, I see a passion for watchmaking, which I just don't see in the previous Black Bays. The previous Black Bays always had a sense of following tradition and painting by numbers. It had a feeling of, well, of course that's what it was going to be. It never felt like there was a lot of the designer in the watch. When I see this watch, I don't get that feeling. Whether it's the choice of the radial brushing on the bezel, whether it's the way that they've alternated the sandblasting and slight polishing on some of the facets on the case, whether it's the choice of what text they've put on the dial and then how they've laid that text out. All of those things come together for me and say, this is a watch that seems to have a level of care, a level of passion, a level of thought, a level of art that I've not seen in any Tudor I've looked at before. And this could be, with the possible exception of, I think I said this about the Silver 58. But this one in particular, I think for the first time ever, I'm seeing a Tudor that I could seriously see myself buying. Okay, let's put the gushing aside. It's not perfect, no watch ever is. I don't really like the snowflake hands, but you know what? I can live with it because it's a Tudor thing, and if you're going to get a Tudor, it's going to have snowflake hands. At least they haven't made the hand too short. I know, for example, Rolex with the Mercedes hands routinely makes that hour hand too short, as though the Mercedes symbol is going to do more work than it can to give you the presence. This watch, the hour hand, seems a much more sensible length. I would have loved the arrow at the 12 o'clock mark on the bezel to be loomed. I understand the commitment to the aesthetic, but I don't think it would have broken the design to have that loom up there. In fact, I think it would have added to it. I'm not coming at this from a diver point of view. I'm not saying it had to be a real diver, because of course it's not going to be. It's bloody ceramic, for God's sake. But I just think it actually would have worked better. I think it would have been a better look. I must admit, I'll jump in right now. I forgot to say this before. I love that they've gone for absolute stark white for the loom against this. I think for this particular watch, that has worked brilliantly. So that's a good thing again. I should say that for a lot of people, not having a date is going to be a big issue. That's not a problem for me. I don't like dates on divers, and I never really set the date anyway, so it's probably just one less thing that's going to be wrong most days were I to wear this watch. I think for me, the single biggest negative, and the thing that I really would have to make sure I could live with, was the thickness. At 14.8 millimeters, it is unnecessarily fat for a 200 meter diver. I mean, for God's sake, Breitling will give me a 500 meter diver that's 13.3 millimeters thick. Longines has a 300 meter ceramic diver that's only 13 millimeters thick. So there's at least 1.5 to 1.8 millimeters of lard that I wish they could get rid of on this watch. But as soon as you say the word Black Bay, as soon as you put that big fat boy 6.5 millimeter thick movement in it, this thing is going to be chunky. The reality is, though, I can live with watches probably about 15 millimeters is the cutoff. So whilst I wish this was thinner, whilst it annoys me that it's as fat as it is, to be blunt, I could probably live with it. You know, it's not going to be a deal breaker as much as it would annoy me. Finally, something that isn't visual, but something that I think has to be recognised is the METAS certification. That is a huge leap forward. I'm not going to go into lots of detail about what METAS is. You guys can look it up on the net. But fundamentally, it's a really rigorous quality standard for watches that covers anti-magnetism, depth, water resistance, accuracy, power reserve, temperature resistance, shock resistance, and I think one other thing, but I can't remember what it is. I love the METAS standard. I love transparency in watches. I thought it was brilliant when Omega went for it. As a Breitling guy, I've said before, I wish Breitling would pick this up and run with it. And I think that it's a really smart choice for Tudor to run with. I think that not only is it a smart choice for Tudor, but more importantly, it's a really good, solid step for us consumers. And I'm really glad to see that in. Once we get to METAS certification, we are one small jump away from talking price. And price is where this watch becomes even more interesting, and we start getting back into the business side of stuff. From a business perspective, from an industry perspective, there's two parts of this watch that are particularly interesting. The first is price. At $6,500 Australian dollars, this watch is something of a steal. Just over $1,000 more expensive than the Longines ceramic, half the price of the equivalent Omega ceramic watch. This watch is hyper aggressively priced, and I mean that deliberately. I don't think that Tudor have found a way to make this watch remarkably cheaply. I think that Tudor have simply cut their margins to the bone on this to get it out there, to make a statement, to grab our eyeballs and drag us towards the brand. I don't mind. I don't care. That's a good thing for us. We get a watch way cheaper than it would have been. But I do still think that this watch is a very aggressive statement of intent from Tudor. What about from a METAS perspective? Now, that one's a really interesting one. I think there's a bit of good news and bad news for Omega in that. Obviously, Tudor going for the METAS certification and offering this watch at half the price of the equivalent Omega is bad news. On the other hand, forget pricing for a second. Tudor is part of the Rolex group. It is inevitably, rightly or wrongly, joined to Rolex in most people's minds. That they have embraced and are using and advertising and leaning on the same quality standard that was pioneered and established by Omega is a huge win for Omega, is a huge fillip to the reputation of the METAS certification. And I think that Omega and the Swatch Group more generally will be really quite happy to see, in the broader sense, that Tudor is embracing and running with this standard. Something else we should note is that, and I hinted at this before, that the METAS certification is not really an engineering certification. It's a quality management. It's a quality certification. One of the things we saw with Omega is very quickly, after having established a core set of technologies that could meet those standards, and having the infrastructure established to do the quality work, they were able to roll the METAS across their entire lineup. I suspect we will see something similar with the Tudor group. I suspect this first watch will be something of a vanguard for an increasing number of Tudor watches getting that master chronometer certification. So that's probably something for us to look forward to. I would not be at all surprised if we see the same strategy from Tudor that we saw with Omega. Remember when Omega introduced the master chronometer, they did it for free. They did not increase the prices of their original Seamasters, and those watches were, like this watch, something of a bargain. Since then, the price of all Omegas have escalated, and we've started paying for the METAS certification. I strongly suspect we will see the same go on with the Tudor if and when that METAS certification starts to roll across the rest of their watches. So that was it. A shockingly gushy response from me towards a brand I've been remarkably cool on. Maybe that won't survive contact with the enemy. Maybe when I actually see the watch in my hand, all of those feelings that I have right now will go away. Maybe it's just the first blush of seeing something unexpected from a brand I've not really been warm to before. You know what? I hope this continues. Who wants to be the kind of guy who goes through life hoping to be disappointed? And I don't want to be that guy who deliberately chooses not to like things from brands that I don't really normally connect with. I like the idea that I can grow and find new things even in companies and places where I've not normally found stuff I like. So with a bit of luck, this watch will continue to live up to the little hype I've built in my mind. Let's see. I might do a follow-up on this in a couple of months. I'm going to go out of my way to try and get this watch and not buy, but have a play with. And I'll see if I can do a follow-up, as I say, when this watch becomes available. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.